Jigsaw puzzles are kind of an addicting thing. You know, I'll walk up if Lenore's doing a jigsaw puzzle and, you know, you look and you see one piece and, once you get one piece to go in there, you end up sitting down. An hour later, you're still looking for that last blue piece with a little flower on the corner of it or something, you know, and it's just kind of one of those things that kind of just, you know, just, I don't know, just kind of addicting little thing. You know, I've mentioned a little while ago that we have some pieces that I've been putting together, trying to have a series, actually. There was the third series of, it all kind of fits together. We looked at the covenants that God made with Israel. We spent 4 weeks doing that, and then we looked at the different dispensations that God works through. And now we're looking at the end times, all right? And I'm not sure how long we'll go into this. We may stop for a little while. I kind of like to make my series only like 4 or 5 weeks long, and then we change them up a little bit. Maybe we'll come back to it again. But I'm trying to set it up to put these pieces in place so that we can understand what God has shared with us. And He has not shared everything with us. And He's not required to share everything with us. But He has done that in letting us know some things. And one of the biggest proofs that this book is real and this book is from God is the fact that there are prophecies that are made in this book, and they are always fulfilled. There's many prophecies that have not yet been fulfilled, and that doesn't mean they won't be fulfilled. It just means that they're not fulfilled yet, but they will be. And there's many prophecies. I think I've mentioned this before, that someone counted up one time over 400 prophecies that was going to happen, that Jesus was going to do while He was on earth, being born, right down to the town that He was born in Bethlehem, and all that kind of stuff. Every one of those came true. And quite often, there's the one that there's many that I like, but one that I really like is that, you know, it'll say there, you know, this was done that the prophecy will be fulfilled. And it almost sounds like we had to do this because this is what was done there, but that's not the case. And when you look at when the soldiers cast lots for Jesus' garments, and it says this was done, the soldiers didn't do that so that they could fulfill prophecy, okay? The soldiers did that because it was prophesied that they were going to do that when they cast lots for Jesus' clothes. But God has laid down some neat things for us. And one thing that I've mentioned several times and not gone into detail on it, which we're going to look at tonight, is when it talks about, when Daniel talks about the 69th and the 70th week. And the 70-week prophecy, excuse me, was actually made by Jeremiah. And I'd like you to take your Bibles and come with me to Jeremiah chapter 25. I'm going to look at a few passages. I've only got a few scriptures that are on the screen. We're going to look at a couple different passages tonight, but come with me to Jeremiah 25 and look at verse 11. And he says, and this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So he goes that this isn't the 70 weeks, as he's talking about once Israel is captured by Babylon. Remember, northern Israel was captured by Assyria, and then southern Israel, Judah in specific, was captured by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar. And Jeremiah says, you are going to be in captivity for 70 years, all right? He goes on a little bit later, and after they are captured, he's warning the people, and they're not listening to him. And look at in chapter 29. Just flip over a couple pages, Jeremiah 29, and we'll look at verse number 7, or right, starting verse number 4, rather. It says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon. Build ye houses, and dwell in them, and plant gardens, and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives, and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that ye may be increased there, and not diminished, and seek the peace of the city, whither I have caused you to be carried away captives, and pray unto the Lord for it, for in the peace thereof shall ye have peace. Essentially, what he's saying here is you're captured. Once they get carried away, they didn't believe they were going to be there for 70 years. And God told Jeremiah, tell them, get used to it. All right? You're going to be here, so plant some vineyards, have some children, build a house. You aren't getting released from this place. All right? And so what happens is there. He says, you're going to be there for 70 years. Most of you, in fact, will die before you get before you get released, but it will be your children, maybe your children's children, or even your grandchildren or great-grandchildren that will finally be released. You're going to be here for a long time, all right? Daniel is worried about these people getting complacent, in that when Cyrus finally gives the edict to say you can go back, that they'll think, it's not half bad here. We'll just stay here. Kind of like when Israel went into Egypt, and when they come out of Egypt, and whenever they came across something they didn't like, they said, well, let's go back to Egypt. Well, he thought, the Israelis are going to be here, and they're not going to want to come back, and they're going to get complacent. And complacency, it's where things get to a place where there's just no real effort. Drew taught me something that was, my son, that I thought was really kind of neat. And you can try this. This works really well. What you do is you come to a project that Brother Smith is working on. And before he's finished that project, you find something that isn't quite done right. And you say, oh, that's good enough. Drives Brother Smith crazy if it's good enough. I don't know if you could feel the heat coming from the back there when Dan was reading and he said, these people that work there, they leave little stuff laying around, plaster and paint and so forth. There was heat coming from that back there. Aaron's, that's no real contractor. He would clean up after himself. But that's complacency, is when we just think that, well, it's good enough. And if we get to that point when we are serving God and we think, what the effort that I'm putting into preaching these messages, the effort that I'm putting into doing whatever we're doing and it's good enough, we've come to a bad spot. We've come to a bad spot. And here, we see here that Daniel was afraid that they were getting to that place. And I want you to take your Bibles, and we're going to come to Daniel chapter 9. That's the setup for this. Daniel chapter number 9. Let's start right at the beginning. It says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years. You know what books he was reading? He was reading Jeremiah. He was reading Isaiah. He was reading what books that he had that God had already inspired for him. So here he is reading these books, all right? And I'll prove it to you if I keep reading here. It says, whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Understand now that Daniel has been there. It's coming to the end, and he has been there the whole time. All right? So this prophecy was made many, many years before, and he is reading this thing, and he's realizing it's coming to the end of the 70 years. He knows. He's reading the number of the years. He says, if it's 70 years, and I came here when I was 14, I'm going to be 84, I'm 83 right now, or whatever. And he's doing the math and saying, it's going to be time for people to be released. For Cyrus, the king, is going to make this decree and let these people go. It's interesting, I could take you to a verse, and I forgot to look it up, but there's actually, it says who it is going to release them. But anyway, here we go, all right? So here, he said here, so here, look at verse 3. He says, and I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. All right, what's he doing? Is he serious? He is very serious, all right? He is very, very serious, and he gets down and he's going to pray, and he's fasting before he prays and getting his heart ready to beg for this people. Verse 4, just the first part. And I prayed unto the Lord my God and made my confession. It's interesting. Daniel accepts responsibility for what has happened to Israel. It says that he makes his confession, and we're not going to look at a great deal at his prayer, because it goes from verses 4 right down to verse 19. I want to skip past that part, but I am going to, as I was reading this, I got to realizing, you know what? God in his word actually records several people's prayers to him. That would make a good series. So we're going to do that sometime. We're going to do a little series. I got a few names. We're going to look at the prayer of Jabez. We're going to look at the prayer of some of Jesus' prayers. And we're going to look at some of these prayers and see what they are. God recorded them there for a reason, all right, to teach us how to pray and what to pray and so forth. He recorded those there for us. So we're going to look at those at another time. But understand here what Daniel is saying here is he is taking onus for some of the problems that are happening to Israel. And we look at Daniel, and there are some really neat things about Daniel. My favorite Old Testament character, everybody knows, is Joseph, right? One of the neat things about Joseph is there's several chapters on Joseph, and yet I know he sinned. He's a man. But it never records anything that Joseph did wrong. Same with Daniel. God, and all the years that he was there serving God for many, many years. He was about 84 years old when he got thrown in the lion's den, all right? He'd been there a long time. But it never records anything that Daniel did. Did Daniel sin? Yes, he did. But he was a godly man, all right? He was a man like Joseph in that there's no recorded sin of his. He's a man like David. He is a man after God's own heart. And I'm going to show you something really cool when we get to another verse here. But there's another couple of verses that just jump out at me about Daniel, and they're in the book of Ezekiel. All right? In Ezekiel chapter 14 and verse 14, it says, "Though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they should not deliver but their own souls by the righteousness, saith the Lord." There's a curse that's coming, and he says, you know what? Even these three guys, Noah and Daniel, all right, and he talks about Daniel there, even to the righteousness of Daniel and Job, the only ones that would be spared because of God's wrath is coming down would be just them. And then he goes on in verse number 20, he says, "Though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, saith the Lord God, they shall deliver neither son nor daughter, but they shall but deliver their own souls by their righteousness." It's God is basically saying here how righteous and how good of a man Daniel is. And yet, here's Daniel in this prayer going to go on and on about where he has faltered in his sin, in his iniquity. I want you to take a look. We're going to look at just a couple things here real quick. Look at verse number 5, all right? Here he says, and it's big inclusive here, he says, "We have sinned." We have sinned. This word sin is talking about missing the mark. Much like Romans chapter 3 and verse 23, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." That sin means to come short of, to fall short of where God is. And that's what Daniel is saying here, is we have come so far short. We as a nation, as Israel, are God's chosen people. He has picked us to bless through us, and yet we have fallen so far short of his glory. And in our sin, he says, we have sinned, okay? So we're going to look at these three words here. And we have committed iniquity, all right? We've committed iniquity. That's what that iniquity is distorting the truth. It's twisting it. It's turning the truth of God. And what did Israel do with the truth of their God? Remember when Aaron was in the wilderness there, and Moses was up in the mountain there for his 40 days, and he says, they said, "Make us a god," and he fashions this golden calf, and he says, "Israel, behold your God." And that's what iniquity is. It's taking and it's twisting the reality of what God is into something that is vile. It is the crookedness of human nature. That's what iniquity is. We are bound and bent. We have to do what's wrong. It's just what we do. I've given this illustration before. You have a little baby, cute as a button little baby. Poor little Monty back there, cute little rascal. But you know what's going to happen? He's going to sin. And about a year from now, he'll be sitting in his high chair, eating his pablum, and his mom will look at him, and he'll take a spoonful of it, and his mom will say, "No, no, no, no," onto the floor. You know why? Well, that's just what we are. We want to do what's wrong, and she'll have to correct that. I mean, she still has that problem with Alexis. She dumps her stuff. No, I'm just kidding. All right, but that's what iniquity is twisting that. All right, look at verse 5. Continue on here. It says, "We have sinned and have committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and have rebelled even by departing from thy prophets, by precepts, and from thy judgments, to rebel, to change away, to go away from God's laws. This is what God lays down, and we have rebelled and turned away from that. He rewords that a little bit in verse number 11. He says, yea, all Israel have transgressed thy laws. We've gone against them. We have rebelled them. That's that word transgress means there. It means to rebel, all right, and to turn against what God has said. And that's what Daniel is saying. This is what we have done. We have done this as a nation. We have not done what you have asked us to do. We have not been the representations that we should be, and we have turned against God. This is really cool. So Daniel is praying. And as he's praying, it's important we understand these three words here. But as he is praying, God sends Gabriel to interrupt him in the middle of his prayer. He sends Gabriel to come and to interrupt him right in the middle of his prayer. And we look here in verse number 21. Verse number 21, it says, yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. The evening oblation is a sacrifice that is made, that was required by law, that was made around, and the evening is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? It's called the evening, that's what it's called. It's very interesting that evening oblation, you know what happened at the same time of the evening oblation? The evening sacrifice? Keep your finger in Daniel 9, we're coming right back there, but I want you to come with me to Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9, verse 33. That's not where I was going. I wrote down the wrong one here. Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. Verse number 33. And when the 6th hour was come, 6th hour is noon, all right? When the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. That's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them that stood by when they heard it said, behold, he calleth Elias. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink, saying, let alone, let us see whether Elias will come and take him down. And Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the ghost. At the time of the evening sacrifice is when Jesus died. At the time when Jesus died is the same time of what's called the evening oblation, but it's also the same time that the Gabriel came, the same time that Daniel was praying. It says Daniel prayed 3 times. I believe this is the same time of day that he prayed, one of those 3 times that he prayed at all the time, lining up with different things of the way that things were set up in the temple. And as he's praying, Gabriel comes to him, all right? And as we see here, come back to Daniel chapter 9. Look at verse number 24. Gabriel comes to him, verse number 21, all right? Let's read right down here. Let's start at verse 22. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Can you imagine praying, and an angel comes to you, God sends an angel from heaven to come and tell you, God loves you. That's why I think he was like David and had a man after God's own heart. When God sends Gabriel to come to him and say, you are, for thou art greatly loved. Doesn't that blow you away? Anyway, moving on here. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. Note here, okay? Daniel was praying. He prayed for three things. He said, our sin, our iniquity, our transgressions. Look what Gabriel says to him here in verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make the end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. We see that he brings this whole thing here. We look at what this is. It's talking about these 70 weeks is going to bring in everlasting righteousness and seal up the vision and the prophecies. This is it. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to give you a vision. I'm going to talk to you about these 70 weeks. And at the end of these 70 weeks, all of the prophecies are going to have been answered. All those covenants that God had made are going to be kept. All of that has happened. It is going to be all finished up and wrapped up when these 70 weeks are done. Okay? The answer in every detail is going to be there. Now, because we know when it was that Daniel had this vision, when it talks about the first year of Darius in chapter 9 and verse 1, this Gabriel came to Daniel in the year 538 BC. That's just history, okay? He came to him in the year 538 BC. The commandment here, when it's talking here in verse 24, and he says, verse 25, sorry. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That is 69. A score is 20. So 3 of those is 60, plus 2, plus the 7, 69 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Understand here that when it began, the beginning, the marker of when these 70 weeks begin are when the decree is made to rebuild your city, Jerusalem, that is back there and is destroyed. Okay? So he comes there, and that happened in, if you look in Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 1, actually I think that's verse is coming up on the screen. Nehemiah chapter 2 verse 1, it says, and it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. So it's talking about Nehemiah. We know a biblical account of Nehemiah and where he was, okay, and what was happening there. But it tells us when it happened there. It gives us the date, essentially, okay, as when the 20th year of Artaxerxes and so forth. If we were to skip down, I'm just going to read verses 7 and verse 8. And when he gives out this decree, he says, moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. And a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he might give me timber and make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. So this is the beginning. This is the marker. This is when the decree comes out that says, go back and fix the city, rebuild the city. All right? So we have that time. That is actually in 445 BC. It's 93 years in the future for Daniel. 93 years ahead. God has told him through Gabriel when this is going to take place. Talks about the troublous times there, even in troublous times. If we were to read in the books of Ezra and read in the books of Nehemiah, we would see what those troublous times are as this edict is being put out there. We know that Nehemiah got there about 444 BC. Took them 52 days to rebuild the wall, but then the reconstruction kept going. Fixing the streets, fixing all the rest of the stuff was going on there. And it continued on. And as we go through our Bible here and we get into Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, it's around, Malachi's book is around 396 BC, and then after that there's 400 years. 400 years where there is no prophets, there's no word from God. It's 400, we call it the 400 silent years because God is silent towards his people for 400 years. Until Zacharias is when Zacharias is serving in the temple and God promises John the Baptist. All right? We see here, we know when it started. There was a man, his name was Sir Robert Anderson, and he mathed this out for us. And we have the 69 weeks, all right, which is, each week is, when it's talking about this, it's understood. Each week is 7 days, but here it's 7 years. That's what he's talking about. Each of these weeks is 7 years. So the 69 weeks is times 7 is 483 years. Now, the Jewish year was 360 days long. So that 480 times 360 is, anybody got it real fast in their head? 173,880, was that the number you had, Amanda? You're correct, all right? That's how many days this is, okay? Or how many years this is, how many days this is, right? And it takes us to the month of Nisan in the 18th year of Tiberius. You know what happened then? Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey. That's when he entered Jerusalem on a donkey. The triumphal entry. 69 of these weeks after the edict by Cyrus to rebuild the temple, or the edict, Cyrus was the one who released him. The edict by Azarias there with Nebuchadnezzar, or Nehemiah rather. I'll get it. Lots of names. 69 weeks later. But there's a stop here. He says, now therefore understand, verse 25, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Cut off. This term is never used in a natural death. This term, what's used in the Hebrew is talking about a violent death. It is talking about either a violent death by man or God doing something and violently killing him, kind of like when Herod took the glory and he hit him with worms. Okay, that's how that would be used there. Or when the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and so forth, that word that is used there was talking about cut off. And that's what it's talking about with Jesus, all right? When he was crucified. In Mark, if you're still there, let's just go over there. Mark chapter 15, verses 7 to 13. Verse 7 here it says, excuse me. And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with him that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude crying aloud began to desire him to do as he had ever done before, speaking of Pilate. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Talking about Jesus. For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy. He knew that there was a plot by the chief priests to get rid of Jesus. All right? So Pilate thinks he's going to do a real cool deal. You know, like, I can release this lousy murderer that you all know is bad, or I can release the King of the Jews. He thinks he's got a loophole to get out of this. But the chief priests moved the people, that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate answered and said again unto them, What will ye then? What shall I do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Crucify him. The leaders rejected Jesus, and they convinced the people, the nation, to reject Jesus. And then they sent him to the cross. And he went there, as we look here, reading down here in verse 26, it says, back in Daniel, and after the 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Jesus didn't die for anything that he did. Jesus wasn't punished for anything he did. He did that for us because we're sinners. All right? And the nations, the leaders, they convinced them, and these same people, only a few days before, were saying what? Hosanna. Jesus was coming in the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and here he is, he's our king, and just a few days before, they were crying out Hosanna. And now they were crying out, crucify him. The nation as a whole, not every person in the nation, but the bulk of them and the nation, the leaders had turned, the bulk of the nation had turned against Jesus, and they wanted to have him crucified. In the month Nisan, in the 18th year of Tiberius, they wanted him to be king, and then they turned against him. And when Jesus was officially rejected by the nation of Israel, the prophetic clock that God has going for Israel stopped. Does that mean he's not going to fulfill his promises? No. When he makes a promise, God always keeps his promise. But those promises as to what he was doing after that 69 weeks, after that 483 years from when Nehemiah got those letters to say, go build the temple, God said, that's it. I'm Israel. I'm setting you aside. I'm not forgetting you. I'm not throwing you away. But my plan with you is stopped. It is paused. Daniel knew that there was a pause. He had no clue that this pause was over 2,000 years. No clue. None of the Old Testament prophets had any idea, and we know that because it tells us there, as we've looked before in Ephesians chapter 3 and Colossians chapter 1, that it was a mystery what God had there, the church. And the dispensation of grace and so forth was all a mystery to them. This temple, we see here as we go down here, and it says, and after 62 weeks the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people and the prince shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war of desolations are determined. Around 70 AD they come in and they ruin the temple. But it wasn't until about 135 AD they came in and just demolished everything. And they took the Jews that were remaining there, they crucified them by the hundreds. And they marched many of them away to be slaves and take them into their arenas to have the lions tear them apart. Over 1 million Jews were wiped out by the year 135 AD by the Romans. That desolation came through like a flood, as Daniel was told to tell. All right. God's plan for Israel was set aside, and he was going to resume his plan when he was done his other plan, which is the church. And Jesus says that I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. This is God's church. The church age belongs to Christ. It talks about us being members of his body. All right, and we're going to be the church is going to be the bride of Christ. And when he's finished so what it does is he set Israel aside. Now he's working with the church. That's his plan. When he's done with the church is going to be pulled out, and then the plan for Israel is going to come back. That pulling out of the church is the rapture of the church, and we're going to look at that next week. But that last week, the last 7 years, is called the tribulation time, the 70th week. Daniel knew in the 70th week, he didn't know when he knew there's going to be a pause. Again, no clue how long that pause is. Definitely nowhere near 2,000 years was his thinking. But he knew some things about what's going to happen in that 70th week. He knew about the Antichrist. Look at verse 27. Speaking of the Antichrist, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years. And in the midst of that week, 3.5 years in, he shall cause the sacrifice of the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of the abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. And we're going to look at the tribulation after we look at the rapture of the church, which comes out before the tribulation starts. Once his program is done with Israel, the program was set aside for Israel. He started his program with the church. When he's done with the church program, that is pulled out. He reinstates the program with Israel. All right? Let me think here. The rapture is the next thing on God's calendar. And after the rapture happens, as we see here in verse 27, the actual tribulation doesn't start. It'll start almost, not instantly when the rapture happens. What happens first is the Antichrist makes a covenant with Israel. That's what it's talking about there, the very first part of that verse here, where it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And we'll look at how that fits into all the other prophecies about the tribulation and so forth. But understand that the tribulation, although it's going to affect the whole world, it is aimed at Israel. It's God's plan again for Israel. In Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 7, it says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it." Again, it's talking about Israel. Israel's other name is Jacob and Israel, all right? And it's the tribulation period is focused on Israel, and we're going to look at that in more in depth, like I said, as we move on here. But it's important that we understand some of these things and how they fit together. And the very next thing that's on the list, there's no other prophecies that need to be fulfilled before the rapture happens and the church is gone. And we'll look at that with blessed hope next week, and it'll be all good news next week, all right? But we serve a great God, and He's allowed us to know some of the details of what His plan is, and for His chosen people, Israel. Why did He choose Israel? I don't know. He chose Israel. That was His plan of salvation, that Jesus would come through Israel. Did Israel deserve it? No. No more than any of us deserve salvation. We don't. But we serve a great God, and He's got great plans for us. He doesn't make anyone make a choice, but He knows what those choices are going to be. That's just God. But we'll look at this stuff as we move on, and we're going to sing "When We All Get to Heaven." Wouldn't that be a good one? Wouldn't that be a good day? All right. If you know Christ as your Savior, you have that promise there of God. All right. We're going to look at that. The next 7 years is that tribulation. There's a lot of things that happen both on earth and in heaven. So it'll take a little while to go through that. Like I said, we might break it up with some other stuff when Christmas is coming, but we'll get there. All right. There's all kinds of neat things that are happening that he tells us that is going to happen. Like I say, both here, not so neat on earth, but really neat in heaven. All right. And looking forward to that. Let's have a word of prayer.